Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Backlot Banter movie review. My name is Tucker Hazel, and today I am joined by my co-host, who ties me up to a chair and tortures me every weekend, Tanner Dykstra. And today we're here to talk about the next movie from the master of disaster, M. Night Shyamalan. But if you want to talk to us about Knock at the Cabin, you can join our Discord. That link is down below somewhere. Just you might have to look a little bit. You can also subscribe to our channel, ring that bell because we're doing movie reviews constantly. Do we ever stop? I don't think so.
God, Tucker, we try to stop so hard,
It's
but we just can't do it.
nope. There's something in us. We got the
Uh-huh.
dog in us. We got the dog in us. But Tanner, we have
hmm
seen Knock at the Cabin. It was a movie I
Yes,
would say we were anticipating because this
I
trailer
was.
and the concept seemed really intriguing. What are your thoughts on Knock at the Cabin?
Well, Tucker, you say that M. Night Shyamalan is the master of disaster, and I think it's an interesting title to give him, not only because of the content of his films, but also the range in quality that people
Sure.
typically associate with his films. And now, and it seems like we say this constantly with him, he's on the upswing again. He's
Yeah.
made a comeback, and he's rattling on with this comeback. And not the Knock at the Cabin is another good entry in M. Night Shyamalan's filmography. I quite enjoyed this one. I think it's simple, which is
Yeah.
not something that can typically be assigned to an M. Night Shyamalan film. More simple than the rest of his filmography
Yeah, I know,
comparatively.
absolutely.
I think what really shine here are his directing abilities, where to put the camera, what to do with it, as
Hmm.
well as the performances and the
Yeah.
performances that he can get out of his actors. So yeah, I quite enjoyed Knock at the Cabin. But what did you think?
Yeah, no, I'm basically on the same page as you. I was hoping that Knock at the Cabin would blow me away, but because it didn't, I was slightly underwhelmed,
Hmm.
but not enough to say like this wasn't a quality film. I think you're absolutely right. The performances, the directing, the camera work, the writing, the pacing, and the editing, I think were all great for a relatively simple film. And
Mm-hmm.
I think as we'll talk about a little bit at the end in spoilers, but I want to put up front as sort of my main critique of this movie is there's not really a twist. You watch
No.
that trailer, you think about the idea of what they're talking about in the trailer. That's it. That's the movie, and it plays out in steps, in stages, but it doesn't really subvert your expectations very much.
But
But I
Tucker,
do
is
think
the
in
twist that there is no twist with M. Night Shyamalan?
maybe I don't know. That's a tough thing to really draw
Uh-huh.
into conversation in my head, but in its simplicity, I think it's very well crafted. It
Mm-hmm.
just is more basic than I was expecting.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to start with let's just start generally. Okay, so
Yeah.
obviously from the trailers, as we know, we get we get our core characters.
Yeah.
We get Daddy Eric and Daddy Andrew. Is that his
Yes.
name?
Yes.
Yes, and Gwen. They are at a cabin in the woods. And they're having a good old vacation when suddenly Dave
Uh,
Batista, Ron Weasley, and their two other friends show
yep.
up. Uh, and they're like, "Hey, sorry we got to do this, but one of you's got to die. Otherwise the world's gonna end." And they're like, "No, you crazy, Dave Batista." But in fact, he may not be crazy.
Yeah, that's the basic plot synopsis, and I
Yeah.
do think that one of the things that appeals to me a lot about this film and appeals to me a lot in other similar films is that one location premise. They really
hmm
use this single cabin to its greatest potential, where the camera can go. Is it outside? Is it looking down? Is it down below the chairs? Is it at someone's feet? Is it really close to people's faces? And you get to know the cabin and like where the rooms are placed and the conflict all taking place ostensibly in one room because so much of this film, the characters are placed into this main den living room area where they're facing off against one another in sort of
hmm
a battle of wits almost like trying to pick holes in each other's thought processes and like okay who's lying who's telling the truth and I think that is absolutely a strength of this movie. Yes, it is simple. It doesn't explode too much outside of that because it is very focused on that one room area, but I really liked how we were stuck in this room with these characters and we just had to follow along every step and every twist and turn of the conversation. That kept it really engaging, especially because of the writing, the editing, and the performances, with I think everyone across the board, everyone giving a really great
I agree.
performance.
Yeah, I think the performances are all great here, but I have to shout out my two faves in particular
Yeah,
are the one that everyone's going to laud with this film, Dave Batista, of
yeah,
course, really bringing home that sort of gentle giant that persona that
yeah,
he's been sort of cultivating over the last couple years
maybe.
of
Yeah,
his career. But also, Ben Aldridge, I thought was
Mm,
very good in this. I saw him
yeah,
most
absolutely.
recently in Spoiler Alert, a film that everyone went out to go see. And he was good in that, but nothing really to write home about. But
Yeah.
here, I think he really gets to flex his leading man potential. Really, I mean, he ebbs and flows through like trying to bargain with these people, keeping them hostage, to really just the fury and the rage of trying to protect his family coming across. I
Yeah.
think he's
Yeah.
quite good. Especially when he's compared to Jonathan Groff, who's the more storied actor, I would
Mm,
say. He has more of a career,
yeah.
but who in this is relatively muted,
Yeah.
largely because he's concussed for
True.
the entirety of the film. So not a lot of dialogue going on over there. But I think that really gives Ben Aldridge the opportunity to shine.
Yeah, I think they play off each other very nicely. There are some semi-romantic moments nearing
Hmm.
the end as they need to sort of bond over what's just happened, but it is mostly them just stressed out of their minds because this is an incredibly ridiculously stressful scenario. But I think the ways that they are so opposite in their
Hmm.
amounts of energy, yes, because one of them is concussed, but in their performances is kind of an interesting balance. And watching Ben Aldridge be really defensive and protective over his husband, who is struggling with a concussion that he
Yeah.
so recently had, but also watching Jonathan Groff sort of come to terms with himself over the course of the movie
Hmm.
and being like, okay, maybe I should sacrifice myself. What's going on? I think that performance is much more subtle, and I do prefer Ben Aldridge's performance. But by the end, he's delivering some moments and blinds. He's talking significantly more, but he's
Yes.
delivering some moments that I thought were very good, but they just weren't on the level of like passion and energy that Ben Aldridge is bringing to his performance, which I think is kind of going overlooked because when people are talking about this movie, they're talking about Dave Bautista as Leonard and
Hmm.
Kristen Cui as Wen, who I think are probably the highlights of the movie. They're obviously more iconic characters.
Hmm.
Little girl and giant man doing that
I
handshake in
love
the
that they
frame.
acknowledge it in the movie because Jonathan Groff looks out the window when they're at the door, when they're knocking at the cabin, and he says to Ben Aldridge, "This guy is fucking huge," and he
Yeah,
is. He is huge.
he is huge, and the juxtaposition between him and Kristen Cui as Wen, I think, is really fun, and they definitely
Yeah. Yeah.
play into that. But Kristen Cui, I mean, this is her first performance, and she's amazing. And
Yes.
obviously, M Night Shyamalan's no stranger to directing kids in his
Hmm.
films, but this is certainly up there.
Yeah.
For a debut performance, I really hope that she continues to get more work. I'm a little iffy on child actors. Like, do I want them to get a ton of work? Do I want them to, have a childhood and like, have fun and be flexible with their life? But
Hmm.
she does bring a lot of interesting energy to this movie. She's incredibly smart. She's always pushing back a little bit, and like that makes her parents uncomfortable. But I thought she was really, really fantastic. And there's a reason they like focused on her and Dave Bautista in the marketing
Yes.
because they're the two forces that I think make this film as interesting as it is. Because Ben Aldridge and Jonathan Groff are delivering good roles, but they're just they're the parent characters. They have
Hmm.
some stresses in their past, which I think make their characters more interesting. But from iconography and unique status, yeah, those two are definitely at the top.
Yeah. Tucker, you brought up how Gwen is very smart, and that leads me to talk about the script for this film, because
Hmm.
obviously this is not wholly original. It's based on a 2018 novel, I believe called The Cabin at the End of the World, which
Sure,
is a
yeah, I think
bit
so.
more on the nose than Knock at the Cabin.
Hmm.
But anyway, I think that the dialogue and the basic story structure is very well written into
Hmm.
this film. Obviously, something I noticed at the very beginning is that Gwen doesn't talk like a child, or at
Yeah,
least as children usually talk in film. But I do appreciate that when a writer and director can sell a child talking in more adult language, I would
yeah,
say, in
yeah.
complete sentence structure and stuff like that. It also speaks to sorry, Kristen Cui, is that the actress's
Yes,
name?
yes.
It also speaks to her performing abilities to
Hmm.
sell this stuff. But it could get repetitive. This
Yeah,
sort of dynamic of two people tied up in a chair, we don't believe you, the four cult people being like, you have to believe us.
yeah, yeah,
It could get repetitive, and it doesn't,
yeah.
because I think it complicates it with the sort of the ritual that these people have bought into, which is
Hmm.
that every time that these people say no at a certain point, they have to sacrifice one of their members,
Yep.
and then a plague has been released unto humanity. Click, turn on the TV. What's
Hmm.
happening? That's when we really get the catastrophic sort of end of the world things happening,
Yeah.
which it's strange to me that this movie is being, sort of put out on premium large format screens because it is relatively contained. It's in that
Yeah.
cabin
Yes.
for 98% of its runtime,
Hmm.
probably. And then when we do cut out of that, we do get, those segments on the TV, but also these little glimpses back into the past of Ben and, or sorry,
Yeah, and
Eric and Andrew.
that's what I wanted to focus on because I think that is what helps the pacing so much.
Hmm.
Is those sequences of flashbacks of getting a little bit learning more about how they met, how they adopted, when how they came to know each other and have disapproving parents about the relationship, all of that. That I think is paced very well because they don't show up that often. There's four or five
Yep.
maybe flashbacks, and they're not particularly long, but I think they come at just the right moment to where the tension is building, tension is building, tension is building, something happens, and boom, we float off
Hmm.
to a flashback sequence, and that sort of resets the tension in an interesting way. And it also like reframes just a tad of what you know about these characters that brings us into the next sequence, which yes, largely is similarly structured and is okay, we're gonna be in the chairs having the argument, and then one of them is gonna die and then turn on the TV. I think that learning just a bit more about each of these characters and the four knock at the cabiners
Hmm.
that are interviewing them definitely kept me engaged because I always felt like we were moving on to learn about the next character. And oh, how is that going to complicate the way that they see each other, how much they know about each other, how much I know about them. And that's strength of the script and the editing, because even though it was structurally repetitive, I always felt there was something new informationally that I could grab onto. And the dynamic also shifts over the course of the movie
Hmm.
as Eric or Andrew, I can't remember which one. I guess
Yeah.
Eric with the concussions like starts to get a little bit better. Like you can see a little more clearly as each of the cult members are killed off one by one. The dynamic does shift, and so even though it is structurally similar, pacing wise, I never felt like okay, why aren't we moving out onto the deck? Why aren't we running through the woods at this moment? Why aren't we cutting out to the larger disaster? Because I was focused on the drama of what's going on in this room, and I felt like they did that cycle very in a very compelling way.
Yeah. And of course, there is a complication thrown out by at least one knock at the cabinet, as you dubbed them, Tucker, and how that person relates back to the past, the past cutscenes, not cutscenes, but the glimpses into the past that we
Yeah,
get of Andrew and Eric.
yeah,
And I won't spoil that here, but it is quite interesting, and how it sort of ties into a monologue that Jonathan Groff gives towards the end is interesting. But what I did want to say, and I mentioned it at the beginning, is praise M. Night Shyamalan's directing abilities. Now, he
yeah.
doesn't need this. He's basically getting a movie made every other year, and even
Sure.
we got another one coming next year, is how
Really?
fast that turnaround
What's
is
it called?
going.
I heard about
Untitled
that.
M. Night Shyamalan film.
Oh, I'm so excited for that one.
Yeah, exactly. It's coming out in like April of next year, so he's got a quick turnaround.
Yeah,
But anyway, this one really, to me, showcases how good of a director he really is, especially with
sure.
his visual language. Because
Mm,
as we said, he just finds a way to spice up this limited location.
yeah,
Our two characters are tied up in chairs next to each other for a good chunk, the first two acts of this film, and he finds a way to shoot that in interesting ways. I'm
yeah,
reminded of
yeah.
one particular sort of sequence when we use Dave Bautista's sort of massive figure and particularly his
Mm,
head
yeah.
to
Blocking off like half the frame.
to block off half the frame. So we're looking at Jonathan Groff, then we cut to the other side, and now his head is taking up the right side of the frame, and we're looking at Ben Aldridge, and we
Mm,
do that a couple of times. I'm like, oh, that's just an interesting way to frame
yeah, I
this.
remember that as
Or
well.
when we
Hmm.
do like a straight down, like a sort of gallery shot where we have both of them in frame and they're offset a little bit. It's just a good and interesting ways to frame this thing to not leave the viewer bored.
Yeah,
But there's
absolutely.
also more showy things. Like there's a moment, I think it's in the trailer, where Rupert Grint is getting beaten up, and like the camera is like mounted to him as his like head is getting knocked back.
Yeah.
So it's just like a cool way to shoot fight scenes here. And
Hmm.
on that note,
Mm,
relatively limited violence in this, I would
yes.
say,
Yes.
because as I said, there are moments where these cult members or knock at the cabiners or whatever you want to call them sacrifice each other. And you would think that this is going to be a gory, bloody sort of moment where we're seeing heads get caved in,
Yeah.
limbs chopped off by the weird pitchfork axe thing that Dave Batista has. But no, where the actions always sort of happens like just out of frame, and I found
Absolutely,
that
yeah.
very interesting. I want to know what your thought on that is, Tucker.
Yeah, I think that it feels a little more palatable.
Yeah.
We don't have to lean into gore to make this section of the film tension filled or realize that this violence is happening. The sound design also very much
Mm-hmm.
implies the violence in a compelling way. But I guess I'm happy that it didn't lean into the gore. It did feel a little bit like, hey, we got to keep PG-13. Let's cut away quite a few times, but I think it's a totally fine thing, a totally
Yeah.
solid choice, because I think it allows it to appeal to more people. I think
Yes.
without the violence, without the Shyamalan twist, without resorting to, okay, we have to have consistent like disaster spectacle moments, it makes it more focused on that drama, on that single room drama, on the conversation that they're having, and that's where the movie shines its brightest. It's, I think, quite different from what M. Night Shyamalan has done before. You think of him more as horror, more as leaning into spectacle, slight action sequences, but this film stays away from that, and I think deservedly so, but like knowingly so. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
like he cut these things because he just wanted to try something different, but because it fits the tone of the film a little bit better and keeps your mind not like reeling over, oh God, I just saw Rupert Grint's head get cut off.
Yeah.
Instead, you're thinking, oh, okay, he's dead now. How does this complicate things? And you look at like the like horror in our characters' eyes, or you're thinking, what do they think about this now that this happened?
Yeah.
That is where the tension and the horror comes in, is in the reaction shots, which
It's
I think is playing to the film's strength of
that's
the
a
actors and the shots.
That's a very good point, Tucker. Yeah, it really is about like the impact of the violence, and not the violence as a spectacle in itself.
Yep.
And I find that really interesting because it is obviously like the reaction of our two main characters seeing someone get murdered in front of them,
Yeah.
or even when it is a more classical action sort of sequence, like inevitably when one of them breaks out of their restraints and runs to the
Believe it
car
or
to get a
not.
gun.
Yeah.
They're getting chased down and they're getting stabbed at, and you kind of the sound design again is fantastic because you don't necessarily see like the blade going into them, but you hear it and you see like the strain on their faces of trying to like load bullets into the gun and save themselves. It's really great, and I do like how M. Night Shyamalan uses this. I also, just another general observation I had,
Mhm.
and we can get into a little bit of spoilers if we want to talk about the very ending
Yeah. Let's
if
give
we
our
need
scores and
to.
then we'll talk at the end.
Yeah, I just like the sort of empathy that M. Night Shyamalan is showing towards uh children and their intelligence in this point in his
Sure. Yeah.
filmography. I think it's really spurred on by, I remember seeing clips from the production of Old where he's like, yeah, my daughter is like helping me make these films now and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I think that's really interesting to see that sort of personal side of him bleed over into his films, and it's much appreciated. But
Yeah.
Tucker, what score would you give Knock at the Cabin?
Considering my slight underwhelmment with the lack of twist, I would say this film is, I think, held back from being one of, at least at the moment, my favorite Shyamalan films. I think it's very, very good. I think the
Mm-hmm.
more that we talked about it and talked about where its own strengths lie, it certainly has bumped up a little bit in my head. So I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10. I think is
Sure.
a great movie. I do wish that there had been a little bit more leaning into the sci-fi crazy cult elements of it, because that's what I like out of
Mm-hmm.
movies, and that's what I like out of M. Night Shyamalan. And one of the reasons why I liked Old so much is because it was kind of ridiculous sci-fi nonsense, and oh, how does this impact the drama? This also did that, but it was much more subdued, and I respect it for that. But on a personal level, like it doesn't appeal to me as much. But yeah, 8 out of 10, very very good movie. Great job, M. Night Shyamalan. The
I'm gonna
Shyamalan
be
Renaissance is in full swing.
I'm gonna be right up there with you, Tucker. I'm gonna give it a 7.8 out of 10.
Okay, all right, great.
Right up there with you. Now we'll say spoilers. Go see the
Yes,
movie for sure. Even if, and we talked about this, even if you're more, abrasive to violence in film, this film
no,
doesn't really lean into
yeah,
that as
it's
much as
not a
others
horror
do.
movie.
No,
It's not a horror movie.
it's more of a thriller.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we'll do spoilers now. So this is your cutoff. But Tucker, you sort of said it already. Is that there is no twist in this?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the twist is there are seeds of doubt planted when Ben Aldridge is like, "Oh, this is like pre-recorded footage. This isn't really happening." But you never fully bought into that, I would say.
Mm.
Um, until of course it comes around that it is true at the end. We see a plane falling out of the sky just above the cabin, so it's all
Yeah.
real. And then yeah, it's just the thing is just happening, and we kill Jonathan Groff, we sacrifice him, and that's the end of the movie. Is that the world stops ending? The knock at the cabiners were correct,
Hmm.
and that's it. We drive off into the sunset.
Yeah, we do. It's a very simple ending, and that's not even my problem. And I actually think I do like that it was real the whole time
Yeah,
because I like sci-fi horse shit.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I do think that maybe the twist that I was looking for is a little bit more of an explanation of the history of this phenomenon. If there was a reason why these four people were chosen to be the harbingers of doom, if this phenomenon and the end of the world has been happening across history, maybe it is a shot of the two of them tied up in the chair with the child, and then you like do match cuts to other points in history where this similar scenario has also happened, like implying that it is something greater and it is like a cycle that the earth is going through. I think that would have scratched my itch of being satisfied that I'm being shown a little bit of stupid
Oh,
lore,
you
but
lore head.
I really do think that
Yeah.
it would have made the film a little more interesting because it feels a little bit nebulous as it ends. Honestly, yes, there were terrible things happening, but I think you can read this film in a way where, yeah, it was a coincidence that everything stopped. There are all these disasters happening, but we do just leave it on a point of watching a TV and then driving off into the sunset, and frankly, not even like much retrospection or introspection or lines at the end. It's a very the movie like stops having conversation
Hmm.
for like the last 5 to 10 minutes of it, and that's okay. But I do think that like it didn't leave a huge impact in my mind because it felt like we just kind of floated away from the crazy things that were happening, and it wasn't like, oh yeah, this is the end. This feels very impactful. It was just kind of like, yeah, it was out there.
Yeah. Ultimately, you could be correct that, maybe if we do get confirmation that it's something that happens throughout history, that would have left more of an impact. But at the same time, I feel like it would have undercut these themes of like blind faith that run throughout the film and trusting in humanity, really,
Hmm.
to do the right thing,
Yeah.
like Jonathan Groff did, or like, we ultimately come to find out that all the Knock at the Cabiners, Dave Batista, maybe not so much Rupert Grint, but and the other two, who I feel bad because we didn't say their names at all in this movie,
No.
but we don't know who they are, so I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Sorry.
Tucker, could you pull them up just so we can get them in here?
Yeah. Nikki Amuka Bird and Abby Quinn
Okay,
as
also
Sabrina
very good.
and Adrian. Yeah,
Yeah,
they're
but
very good. They were very good.
we also come to find out that they're just like good, honest, normal people who were called to do this because some cosmic force uh,
Does this to the planet?
yeah,
Who knows?
decided that this is how the planet works,
Yeah.
essentially. And I do think that there is a bit of reconciliation at the end when Boogie Shoes comes on. Obviously,
Yeah.
it's the song they all shared as a family. And
Hmm.
at first, Ben Aldridge shuts the song off, and then he sort of leaves it, and then Gwen turns the song back on and shuts it off. She's like, "Oh, I understand. My dad is still mourning. This is a tough time. Maybe things aren't going to be just like they were." And then Ben Aldridge is sort of he looks over at it again. He turns it back on, and he's like,
Yeah.
"No, we're still a family. We can still go forward,
Yeah.
and with our love and remembrance for Jonathan Groff,
Eric. Yeah.
Eric." And yeah, and then they drive off into the sunset. Um, I also just want to point out, very similar to Cabin in the Woods.
Mm.
That sort of plot line where these people go to a cabin in the woods where they are made sacrifices to like the old gods who will destroy the world if they don't make the sacrifice. Interesting. Except at
Yeah.
the end of that film, the world is destroyed. So
Hmm. Yeah. But yeah, solid ending. It
yeah,
doesn't complicate or like lower my thoughts on the movie too much, but I do think it could have been better at least for my experience with
yeah,
the film. Maybe this is the ending that works best for the story they're telling. Maybe leaving it a little more nebulous and a personally emotional place reflects what Shyamalan was going for with this film, the themes of the movie is going for, but it left me a little bit underwhelmed, and I
yeah.
had to reflect this in a review. But final point,
Final point. I think the ending will do that to some people, but we'll wait and see what the wider reception and where this one falls in the greater
yeah.
public understanding of his filmography. I haven't seen a lot of his big films, by the way, so
Hmm.
this is my number one Shyamalan film as it
Oh,
stands right
really?
now.
Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
but I haven't seen like Signs or The Sixth Sense or what's the other one?
Unbreakable?
And I've seen Unbreakable. I don't know what the other one is. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you next time.